Control V. Very. Come here, owl. Part 2. Hello, Bobs. We're back with popular entertainments through the ages. Let me set this up. Popular entertainments. And I'm forced to sit upstairs in the sweltering 82-degree heat because my basement doesn't like the Wi-Fi on my phone. But there we go. Save. Let's do this, bruv. Shall open the chat. What do we got? All right. You gonna let me do this? Please? 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 Please, bruv, please. All right. Change is saved. Let's watch it. Part 5, Chapter 1. What is the title of this chapter? Looking great, other than the glare. Come on, stop. There you go. Good job. This chapter is entitled... Damn, I'm that many pages in. I know I read 14 pages, but this seems like 20. Mimes, minstrels, and strolling players. First part was actually pretty damn good. The owl commands you to listen. All right, we're part 5, chapter 1. In addition to conjuring and other forms of entertainment, there was also, of course, the higher types provided by the better class minstrels. The Anglo-Norman trouvère was a more serious-minded singer than the provincial or provençal? Provincial, I'll just say provincial, troubadour. Wace has already been mentioned, and Marie de France, the former's Roman de Rue, a lengthy poem in several parts, which were recited separately, deals historically with the Norman dukes. In his Roman de Brut, the poet tells old stories of Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. Thanks, bruv. Thanks, Mr. Taco. He also wrote Chronique Ascendant des Dux de Normandie, l'Établissement de la Feste de la Conception, and La Vie de Saint Nicholas. The trouvères, when singing their songs and chantingly reciting their long narrative poems, accompanied themselves on the ancient harp of the Anglo-Saxon gleeman, or more ordinarily on the vielle, a stringed instrument which, like the violin, was played with a bow. More and more, however, they recited the longer pieces without the aid of music. Then they read them aloud to their audiences, and instead of memorizing the innumerable verses, by the middle of the 14th century, the literary man had taken the place of the trouvère. In addition, the English language had absorbed the Norman French. All right, Brobs, you can stay forever. So instead of listening, as in earlier days, to an interminable recitation in French by a peregrinating, who the hell says peregrinating? Peregrinating trouvère or jongleur, the literate classes were able to read in English the Canterbury Tales of Chaucer, the often desk-bound civil servant, who, besides being the father of English poetry, was the last of the type of medieval trouvère. His Trulius and Cresside, awful with these words, so don't hold me to him, though very long, was to be ready. Is that ready or red? Ready or else song. What's up, Leslie? What's up, bruv? Unlike the trouvères of England, the troubadours of Provence did not gradually evolve into something else. Their end came suddenly. They were mercilessly wiped out by the armies of the church. The reason for the ordering by the Pope in 1299 that a crusade should be preached and for the subsequent ruthless march into Provence of an army from the north of France was the widespread adoption in Provence. I need to look that up. The hell is that word? Is it Provence? Provence? I'm gonna keep saying it. I gotta look it up. Provence. It says it's a region in France. How do you say it? Pronounced Provence. Pronunciation. Come on. Pronounce. Provence. Provence. Yeah, it's Provence. Let's hear it. Oh, that's right. I got the volume turned on. All right. Provence. The Albigenses had sprung up about 200 years earlier in the south of France and had subsequently thrived under the protection of William IX, the Count of Poitiers, first of the troubadours. The connection between the troubadours and the heretics had grown more close with the passage of time, and it is easy, perhaps, to understand the reason. The Albigenses taught that there is no virtue of which we can wholly approve and no vice which we can entirely condemn. Their doctrines were adopted by many of the common people and by most of the nobles, and found a particularly warm welcome among the gay living troubadours and their lady loves. The troubadours attacked in song and fundamental beliefs of Christians, and not without considerable justification. They waged bitter warfare against the clergy, many of whom were violating the principles of their own religion. In the marketplaces, the jongleurs of the troubadours made many converts by explaining in song the tenets of the Albigenses and by vigorously attacking the church and the Christian faith. In turn, the few troubadours who adhered to Christianity attacked the heretics. It's weird to me that the church and people in general allowed, fucking jugglers and stuff. It's kind of shocking that they allowed them, considering many of these religions didn't even allow people to dance. Hence, at last, the preaching of a crusade from 1,000 pulpits and the coming together of a large army slated probably with some exaggeration, to have numbered nearly 250,000 men under Simon de Montfort and the papal legate. The Albigenses, whose religious beliefs were sincerely held, gathered their retainers and vassals, put their castles into a state of defense, and awaited the invasion. The Crusaders were merciless. They besieged towns and castles and slaughtered the inhabitants, or burnt them at the stake. Provence was laid waste, and in the impoverished and desolate land there was no wealthy and leisured audiences left to listen to the singing by the troubadours of the pleasures of love. In the later half of the 13th century, Guiraud Require, the last of the troubadours, found protection in Spain, and sadly he sang, "Song should express joy, but sorrow oppresses me, and I have come into the world too late." Tumblers of the Middle Ages. Damn, they have some dexterity. Feats of balleting in the 14th century. The hell is that thing? A canoe? Yeah, I'm shocked that the church even allowed this to occur. Tricks taught to horses in the 14th century. Is that really a horse? I mean, it kind of looks like a hobby horse. Here you go, buddy. Learn this trick. J. Ducrot, clown to the circle, in the grotesque scene, The Tea and Supper Party, 19th century. Why is that grotesque? 6. The jongleur, who had been in existence before the troubadour, and the trouvère outlasted them both. In England, the best of the displaced jongleurs found occupation in the courts of kings and noblemen as musicians, jugglers, and jesters. Edward III presented £100, which was then, of course, worth much more than the same amount of present day money, to the minstrels who provided entertainment at the marriage of one of his daughters in the 15th century under Henry V or Henry VI. The king's jongleur received an estate from the monarch. Later in the century, Edward IV had 13 minstrels, but in the same reign, their number was reduced to 8, and in the 16th century, they disappeared. The household minstrels were at the top of their profession and flourished at the expense of the wandering minstrels. These had to face the difficulties which have always confronted, yet have never entirely subdued, the itinerant entertainer. Many of them, however, settled in Bristol, Norwich, York, and other towns as waits or bands. They received a regular salary, and their services were at the disposal of the mayor. Others set up in towns as independent minstrels, attending marriages, festivals, and revels, haunting taverns and being present in large numbers at every fair. Finding ready audiences among the common people, who still depended very largely on the minstrels for songs and stories, many of them became ballad singers. They strolled all over the country, pushing their way into one mansion and receiving halfpence, entering another and receiving kicks. Hamlets, villages, and towns were visited by them, and in cottages they told tales which, said Sir Philip Sidney, held children from play and old men from the chimney corner. Their ballads were sung or chantingly recited to the accompaniment of a harp, cithern, guitar, fiddle, or some other instrument. For most of the ballads there was an appropriate tune, although several of the tales would go to the same air. Often the verses were supplemented by passages of prose narrative. Many of the ballads were so old that all trace of their origin had been lost. Others were abridgments of the long lays of the trouvères, and among the best were some of the new ballads composed by the strollers themselves. Indeed, the most original and powerful poetry of the 15th century was composed by despised ballad singers for lowly audiences. The refined writers were laboriously and unfruitfully imitating Chaucer. As the audiences of the ballad singers were illiterate, the stories were told in simple language and in a direct manner. They were impressive and full of action, whether they dealt with tragedy, comedy, or a happy ending tale of love. A few varied examples may be interesting. Childe Maurice is the story of one who sends a message to John Stewart's wife to meet him in the wood, but thither goes John Stewart himself and slays Childe Maurice through jealousy, not knowing him to be in truth the lady's only son. In Clerk Saunders, a young knight is slain in his sweetheart's arms, and afterwards his ghost appears to her. Not to be her. Childe Vyet, or the Brothers, tells of a lady who is forced to marry one brother while loving the other. They kill one another and she goes mad. The Jolly Goshawk is the tale of a maiden to whom a bird brings a love letter from Scotland. She feigns death by taking a sleeping draught, is carried to Scotland for burial, and there meets her lover. In King John and the Abbot of Canterbury, the ballad singer says and keeps his word, and I'll tell you a story so merry, concerning the Abbot of Canterbury. The abbot, for his supposed misdeeds, has to answer 3 questions, or his head shall be struck off from his body. Hey, answer 3 questions or I'm going to fucking decapitate you. He asks for a fortnight grace, but in the interval, he cannot think of the answers. On the appointed day, his shepherd goes to London in his stead, and answers the king's questions. The third of them is, "What do I think?" And the answer is, "You think I am the abbot of Canterbury, but I'm his poor shepherd, as plain you may see. That am come to beg pardon for him and for me." The abbot gets his pardon, and the witty shepherd receives a pension of 4 nobles a week for his merry jest. Other famous minstrel ballads are Barbara Allen's Cruelty, Helen of Kirkconnell, The Children of the Wood, The Bailiff's Daughter of Islington, and Sir Patrick Spens. One of the best, Glasgarion, besides being worth reproducing as an example of this once popular and still exciting form of poetry, is particularly interesting here as it deals with a harper. Glasgarion. Glasgarion was a harper good. Glasgarion was a harper good. He harped to the king. Glasgarion was the best harper that ever harped on string. He'd harp a fish from the river, or water out a stain. He harped the heart frae a maiden's breast, to love but him alane. He's ta'en his harp until his hand, he harped and he sang, and aye he harped to the king, wha never thought it lang. I'll give you a robe, Glasgarion, a robe of the royal pa. Gin ye will harp in the winter night, afore my noble pa is pale, rich cloth. Okay. The king but and his nobles sat burling at the wine, drinking festively, and he wadded he nane but his daughter to wait on them at dine. Glasgarion's ta'en his harp in hand, till he's harped them asleep. Except the young princess, whom love did waking keep. At first he has harped a grave tune, and syne he has harped a gay, and money's the sigh and the loving word that passed atween them tway. I don't know what the hell any of this means, and I gotta read more pages of this? Come on now. Come to my bower, Glasgarion, when all men are at rest. As I am a lady true of word, thou shalt be a welcome guest. Home then came Glasgarion, a glad man, lord, was he, and come thou hither, Jack, my boy, come hither unto me. For the king's daughter, Glasgarion said, hath granted me my boon, and at her bower door I must be by the setting of the moon. Lie down in your bed, dear master, and sleep as sound as you may. I'll keep good watch, and I'll waken you, afore it be time to gay. But up he rose, that lither lad. Lither is dissolute, deceitful. His master's clothes did on, a collar he cast upon his neck. He seemed a gentleman. And when he came to the lady's bower, he turlet at the pin. Turlet is rattled the latch. The lady, she was true of her word. She rose and let him in. He did not kiss the lady's mouth, nor when he came, nor yode went. And sore that lady did mistrust he was but of churl's blood. Home then came that lither lad, did off bathe cloak and shoon, and cast the collar from off his neck. He was but a churl's son. Then quickly rose Glasgarion, did on his hosen and shone, and cast the collar about his neck, for he was a lord's own son. And when he came to the lady's bower, he turlet at the pin. The lady was more than true of her word. She rose and let him in. Oh, whether now have you left with me your bracelet or your glove, or are you returned back again to know more of my love? Glasgarion swore a full great oath by oak and ash and thorn. I was never before in your chamber, lady, sith the day that I was born. Oh, then it was your lither foot page, he hath beguiled me. Then she pulled forth a little sharp knife that hang down by her knee. O'er her white feet the red blood ran, or ever a hand could stay, and dead she lieth on her bower floor at the dawning of the day. Home then he runs, Glasgarion, and woe, good lord, was he, says, come thou hither, Jack, my boy, come hither unto me. If I had taken a life tonight, Jack, I would tell it to thee. But if I have taken no life tonight, Jack, thou hast taken 3. And he pulled out his bright brown sword, and dried it on his sleeve, and there smote off that lither lad's head, who did his lady grieve. Who was Jack? He set the sword's point to his breast, the pummel to a stone, through the falseness of that lither lad. These 3 lives were all gone. Many ballads dealt with the adventures of Robin Hood. The famous outlaw probably lived at the end of the 12th century and the beginning of the 13th, but the stories connected with his name are the happy products of fertile imaginations. Outlaw who robbed the rich to feed the poor, archer who could split a willow wand at 50 yards, good companion who lived in the greenwood with his merry men, devout worshipper of the Virgin and scourge of monks and abbots. Robin Hood was the idol of the common people. Among his other qualities, he embodied the Anglo-Saxon spirit of revolt against the Norman conquerors, even in the late 14th century, by which time all classes spoke and were English. The peasants of sturdy Anglo-Saxon stock looked to the ballad singers for inspiration in their struggle against the serfdom introduced by the Normans. The refrain of one popular rhyme ran all over the country and fanned the flames of discontent that broke out into the peasant revolt. When Adam delved and Eve span, who was then the gentleman? The hell is that? Is that fireworks or people shooting? The love of freedom is a note which has often been struck in England by popular entertainers. Beowulf was an exciting story, but it was more than that. It told of one who died to free his people. The ballads of Hereward the Wake were excellent entertainment, and they related the deeds of one who refused to bow his neck to the yoke of the Norman conqueror, and so on through the ages, right down to the popular patriotic songs which were sung so lustily in the music halls of yesterday, and some of which are still enthusiastically sung by English audiences when old-time celebrities reappear on the music hall stage. The ballad singers of the 14th and 15th centuries dealt with the freedom of the peasants from political and economic oppression. This enhanced their popularity with the people, but it helped to gain for them the enmity of those who made the laws. In addition, the ballad singers, like all other strolling entertainers, were disliked on account of their general dishonesty. Shakespeare's how do you say that? Autolycus? Autolycus. I don't know how to say it. Is a typical member of the profession singing, when daffodils begin to peer with high, the doxy over the dale, why then comes in the sweet o'er the year, for the red blood reigns in the winter's pale. The white sheet bleaching on the hedge, with high the sweet birds, oh how they sing, doth set my prigging tooth on edge, for a quart of ale is a dish for a king. The lark that tara-lara chants, with high, the thrush and the jay, are summer songs for me and my aunts, while we lie tumbling in the hay. I have served Prince Florizel, and in my time wore 3 pile, but now I am out of service. But shall I mourn for that, my dear? The pale moon shines by night, and when I wander here and there, I then do most go right. It tinkers may have leaved, if tankers may have leave to live, and bear the sowskin budget, then my account I well may give, and in the stocks avouch it. He did not entirely depend for his living upon the stealing of sheets from hedges and the picking of pockets. He sold ribbons, brooches, and many other trinkets, but his ballads were the most popular. Let's first see more ballads, says Clown. We'll buy the other things anon. Here's another ballad, Autolycus. I'm going to say it's Autolycus. Tells him of a fish that appeared upon the coast on Wednesday, the 40 of April, 40,000 fathom above water, and sung this ballad against the hard hearts of maids. 2 of the young ladies know the tune of another and less gloomy ballad. He sings it with them, saying, I can bear my part, you must know 'tis my occupation. When he has left them, Autolycus says, "Ha ha, what a fool honesty is, and trust his sworn brother, a very simple gentleman. I have sold all my trumpery. My clown, who wants but something to be a reasonable man, grew so in love with the wench's song that he would not stir his petitos till he had both tune and words, which so drew the rest of the herd to me that all their other senses stuck in ears. He had them stolen most of their purses. He had then stolen most of their purses. Pardon? Some of the strollers even stole horses and sold them in the next village. Lower and lower they sank until 1572, an act of parliament decreed that fencers, bear leaders, common players, minstrels, and jugglers that wandered abroad without license from 2 justices of the peace at least should be taken, adjudged, and deemed rogues, vagabonds, and sturdy beggars. As such, they were continually in danger of the stocks, the whipping post, or prison. One writer chortled, when Jesus went to Jairus' house, whose daughter was about to die, he turned the minstrels out of doors, among the rascal company. Beggars they are with one consent, and rogues by act of parliament. Not even the passing of a severe act of parliament could appease the wrath of many people who prided themselves on being religious or austere in manners. It must be admitted that many of the popular entertainers were worthy of condemnation. But reformers who confuse the best with the worst do more harm than good. In the following onslaught, the spectator is looked upon as a poor, innocent lamb, and the entertainer as a wolf in sheep's clothing. The attempted reform was therefore set about in the wrong way. It is a pity that would-be reformers of entertainments in the past and in the present did not have stamped indelibly on their minds the substances of the declaration that the drama's laws, the drama's patrons give. If the spectator is reformed, the demand for unwholesome fare dies. All right, let's look at these before we continue. Left, Tarleton, the Elizabethan comedian, as clown. William Kemp, who acted in Shakespeare's plays, dancing the Morris. Lane, the conjurer, who appeared at Bartholomew Fair in the late 18th century. If the entertainer is, and we'll skip this for now until the end of this section, suppress the demand is merely diverted. If the entertainer is suppressed, the demand is merely diverted. Soon there is need for the suppression of other entertainers. However, we must not be rude to Philip Stubbs by keeping him waiting while he is bursting to express his wrath. He condemns such drunken sockets and bought-eye parasites as range the countries, rhyming and singing of unclean, corrupt, and filthy songs in taverns, alehouses, inns, and other public assemblies. And he also deplores the number, for every town, city, and country is full of these minstrels to pipe up a dance to the devil. But some of them will reply and say, "What, sir, we have licenses from justices of peace to pipe and use our minstrelsy to our best commodity. Cursed be those licenses which license any man to get his living with the destruction of many thousands." The strollers, however, did not wither up like grass on a blasted heath, but merely continued to tramp the road. Derby Day by W.P. Frith. Let's see who's out there. It's a bunch of minstrels and such. I don't know what the hell this all is. All right, 7. Some of the itinerant entertainers in the 15th century added the performance of plays to their repertoire, or perhaps dropped altogether their juggling and tumbling, and singing in favor of play acting. The first plays in which they appeared in companies, which usually consisted of 4 or 5 men, and a boy who played female parts, were the religious mysteries, miracles, and moralities, dealing respectively with biblical stories, legends of the saints, and subjects which illustrated moral truths. These plays, by the 10th century, had developed perhaps from the dramatic elements of the Mass and other services. They were played inside the church by ecclesiastics. During the later half of the 13th century, laymen began to perform them. Plays and even series of plays were acted by amateurs on moving platforms that went in a procession through the streets and stopped at certain fixed places. These performances became exceedingly popular, and strolling minstrels therefore diverted their talents from tricks that were as old as the hills to the new form of entertainment that was all the rage. They introduced low comedy and gross obscenity into their performances, which gave in inn yards and public streets, and these elements were even more strongly marked, in the plays which they themselves originated. In many places, the visits of the strollers were disrelished so much that local laws were passed, which made it almost impossible for performances to be given or which forbade them entirely. Some of the strollers left the profession. Many reverted to juggling and other lines which, centuries earlier, had supported their more and less direct ancestors, the mimes, when they had been forced out of the Roman theaters. In addition to the difficulties placed in their way by regulations, the strollers had to face the competition of players who had been household minstrels. Wearing their master's livery and calling themselves his players, these better class professionals were under his protection. He became responsible for their conduct, and they in turn had to ensure that his good name under which they traveled was not besmirched by vulgarity or obscenity in their performances. They played not to the rowdy audiences of disreputable inn-yards, but in palaces, mansions, town halls, schools, and even churches. When they visited the town, instead of being set in the stocks or publicly flogged, as was often the reception given to the unattached strollers, they received a welcome. A present of wine might be given to them by the town officials. The mayor himself might give them a dinner, and it is on record that a company of English players who visited Aberdeen were given the freedom of the city. The best of the troops remained most of the time in London, where they found the readiest audiences and the richest schoolhouses, town halls, and churches not being available. They generally played in the yard of an inn, erecting there a temporary stage and gathering an audience by walking in a procession through the streets with flags and drums. The inconveniences connected with the temporary stage and the summoning of an audience were done away with in several inns, the owners erecting permanent stages and building wooden benches in the galleries which ran round the yard. Wealthy spectators sat on the gallery benches, and in the yard stood the common people. Says Green, the rough mob of the pit inspired, as it felt, the vigorous life, the rapid transitions, the passionate energy, the reality, the lifelike medley and confusion, the racy dialogue, the chat, the wit, the pathos, the sublimity, the rant and buffoonery, the coarse horrors and vulgar bloodshedding, the immense range over all classes of society, the intimacy with the foulest as well as the fairest developments of human temper, which characterized the English stage. The people itself brought its nobleness and its vileness to the boards. No stage was ever so human, no poetic life ever so intense, wild, reckless, defiant of all tradition, of all conventional laws. The English dramatist owned no teacher, no sources of poetic inspiration, but the people itself. To the inns came large crowds, which included apprentices and hooligans, and as drinks were served on the spot, even during performances, sections of the audiences were very turbulent, and frequently there was rioting. The city authorities became alarmed. When a Puritan was elected Lord Mayor, the fate of the troops was sealed. For even apart from the disturbances, the Puritans were bitterly opposed to the players on religious grounds. The actors found themselves being hampered by restrictive regulations. Accordingly, in 1576, James Burbage, the head of the Earl of Leicester's troop, erected a permanent building outside the city adjoining Finsbury Field and called it the theater. Circular or polygonal in shape, having three galleries that were covered with thatch and a center that was open to the sky, it was the first permanent public theater in England. Almost immediately, it had a neighboring rival in the Curtain. The Elizabethan playhouse was firmly established. What year was that? 1576. The audiences, particularly the rough mob known as the groundlings, who stood in the uncovered portion, were fond of quips and pranks and sensations. Before very long, they were acclaiming a series of plays which an actor-author turned out at great speed to satisfy their cravings and to fill his ill-lined purse. The nature of the plays may perhaps be judged from the following short list. They contain such things as street brawls, duels, murders, suicides, ghosts, witches, madmen, torturings, processions, dances, pageants, drums, trumpets, cannon firings, clownish antics, obscenities, thunder and lightning storms, shipwrecks, open graves, skulls of dead men, riotous drinking, lying, thieving, cursing, swearing, all mixed up in a mass and delivered hot and strong to the audience that was appreciative. Unkempt and noisy. Other audiences and other playwrights were just as bad, if not worse. This is what Daniel Defoe wrote about them to a nobleman at a time when refinement had taken the place of coarseness, and the emphasis laid on certain words is his own. About 100 years ago, there were about 5 or 6 playhouses in this town, which was then far less populous than now, all frequented and full, though the stage was yet in its rude, uncultivated dress, without art in the poetry or in the decorations, and was only supported by the lower sort of people. Yet, my lord, these lower sort of people had souls high enough to be diverted by the naked and inornamental drama. He was alluding to the type of play that has been mentioned, popular entertainments like Hamlet, King Lear, Othello, Romeo and Juliet, and King Henry IV. And that's the end of chapter 1. The fun of the fair comes next. Popular entertainments through the ages by Samuel McKechnie. That's all, bruv.